Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Sophia and Doug, for organizing this fantastic workshop. Just before I show a couple of slides, I think that the main challenge here, and in times of the pandemic, I think we've seen this in other dimensions of public policy, is how to communicate uncertainty to a public that transits between asking for certainty and suffers from a lot of anxiety about the future. So how to be able to communicate uncertainty. And that is the main challenge. And we've seen this in the vaccines, and we've seen this in the communication of health experts, etc. And we see how hard it is to communicate the fact that public policy is not about making people believe that everything is going to be all right, but rather that certain things might happen, they might not be as expected, and we need to be able to react to those. So if you put the first slide, please. I think it's we've tried to do this in the simplest way possible, and this means that we've tried to emphasize the uncertainty, certainty, if you want, trade-off in the communication in different ways. So, for instance, here is the output gap. Doug asked for 3 slides, so I have one slide for the output gap, another for inflation, and another for the interest rate. So here you can see the very large contraction due to the COVID, the economic consequences of COVID. And there was a significant amount of policy support from the monetary, credit, fiscal, and even some very unorthodox measures. And this has meant that the output gap in less than a year has reversed by about 20 percentage points. So this is a massive reversal. And here, what we have shown, we showed this a few weeks ago only, you can see how what we were expecting at the beginning of this year in March, and how the forecast started to improve. And now, at the end of 2021, the green line, we have a positive output gap of around 5% of GDP. So we can very simply say the economy is overheating. The economy is growing at a rate and is at the level of GDP that is creating inflationary pressures. Now, if you go to the next slide, this is the forecast for inflation. We also show here what we were expecting in June and what we expect today. An interesting thing is that there's been a debate. There's been a debate about the fact that this is happening everywhere. Inflation is being affected everywhere. So it's like an international phenomenon. And therefore, the underlying theme that some critics have put there is that given that it's happening everywhere, it's going to be solved by itself and we don't need to do anything. Right? It's an international problem and it will just go away. And the fact that you need to deal with that type of opinion and saying, well, the inflation doesn't go back to target just by itself. The nature of inflation, it has an international component, a domestic component, and it has a hump. But this hump is transitory, but it's transitory thanks to the fact that monetary policy is also normalizing. And if you go to the third slide, this is the way we've been trying to communicate this in terms of monetary policy. So I want to highlight 2 things here. First, this is not a fan chart. It's an area. We believe that we had a fan chart at the beginning compared to this, but we figured that it was too hard to communicate the different areas. So we simply decided to put out an area which we call the monetary policy corridor. And this monetary policy corridor gives the broad sort of outline of monetary policy paths that are consistent with sort of reasonable deviations from the baseline forecast for inflation and output. And it gives some degree of variation that is quite significant. So then, as time goes by, we can communicate that we are going through the upper path or the upper bound or the lower bound, and we can compare to the corridors from before, like the blue one, which was the one that we had put out in March, or the yellow one, which we put out in June. And you see how, as the economy has started to overheat and is growing faster, Also, the path for policy has gone up. We can compare this with the neutral stance, which is between 3.5% and 4%. So this corridor allows us to say that monetary policy will go above the neutral stance in the year 2022. And currently, we had our last monetary policy decision this week. This is the red dot, which is actually slightly outside of this corridor. So things have developed even faster in terms of growth and inflation. And the market expectations, that green line, is pointed out towards the same thing, that monetary policy will have to be tighter, or on the tighter end of this monetary policy corridor. Now, the interesting thing about this figure is that you get many questions about, well, what happens if this and that scenario plays out? You say, well, that's on the upper side of the corridor. But what does it mean? You say, well, you can download the Excel and just pluck the numbers out of that. So it makes the communication of different scenarios much easier, because you have numbers. You don't need to choose adjectives or words to describe things, because those can be interpreted in many ways. And as you see, then we have this mechanism of the corridor, which provides a certain degree of uncertainty and variation, because we don't want monetary policy to be understood as a sort of a commitment to a certain path, or as a way of saying, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, and we don't need to do anything about it. The situation we're in requires normalization that is faster than what we expected, and this actually will lead to monetary policy being above neutral for the bulk of 2022. Now, the end side is that this is a hump. So inflation and growth normalize because of monetary policy actions, and therefore monetary policy doesn't need to be tight forever. It can go back also to neutral by 2023. So this is the way we do it. I think has been useful. Interestingly, we devised this mechanism before the pandemic, and when the pandemic hit, we were in the zero lower bound, so we had no band. We were sort of at the bottom of the policy rate. So it only now has, in the second half of this year, we've begun to sort of widen the corridor to show these different paths. So with that, I think I can stop and give the word to the other speakers. Thank you.